Picture this: the Mediterranean world, a vibrant tapestry of thriving empires and bustling cities, suddenly thrown into chaos. Great kingdoms crumble, cities burn, and entire civilizations vanish almost overnight. And at the heart of this devastation, a mysterious force known only as the Sea Peoples. Who were they? Where did they come from? And how could a group so powerful, so disruptive, vanish from history without leaving a single written record of their own? This isn't just a historical footnote, it's one of antiquity's greatest unsolved mysteries, a puzzle that challenges everything we think we know about the rise and fall of civilizations. For over a century, the Sea Peoples swept across the ancient world like a storm, toppling empires from Egypt to the Hittites, leaving behind ruins and questions in equal measure. Their name echoes through the few surviving records of their enemies, inscriptions etched in stone, desperate pleas for help, and fragmented tales of their relentless attacks. Yet, despite the sheer scale of their impact, they remain ghostly figures, their origins, language, and even their final fate shrouded in silence. No chronicles, no monuments, no first-hand accounts. Just the echoes of their destruction. It's as if they were deliberately erased from history, or perhaps never wrote themselves into it at all. This is the story of how a shadowy group rewrote the map of the ancient world, then disappeared without a trace. A story pieced together from shattered pottery, sunken ships, and the whispers of myth. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into the clues left behind the archaeological breadcrumbs, the cryptic mentions in ancient texts, and the theories that span from the plausible to the extraordinary. We'll explore how the Sea Peoples orchestrated a century of upheaval, why their silence speaks volumes, and what their legacy tells us about the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. This isn't just a tale of destruction, it's a window into how history is written and how easily it can be lost. So let's set sail into the unknown and uncover the secrets of the Sea Peoples. The Mediterranean of the late Bronze Age was a world of glittering palaces, sprawling trade networks, and powerful empires speaking to each other in diplomacy and war. The Egyptians ruled the Nile with monumental ambition, the Hittites commanded Anatolia from their stone-walled capital, and the Mycenaeans built fortress cities atop Greek hills, their gold-laden tombs whispering of warrior kings. Copper and tin flowed along maritime routes to fuel the bronze that gave the age its name, while clay tablets crisscrossed between courts, recording everything from royal marriages to complaints about delayed shipments of olive oil. This was an interconnected, sophisticated world until it wasn't. Then came the fires, layers of ash in ancient cities like Ugarit, Hattusa, and Mycenae tell the same story. Walls toppled, granaries emptied, and workshops abandoned mid-craft. A clay tablet from Ugarit, baked in the heat of its own destruction, captures the desperation in a plea for help that never came. The enemy ships are already here, our cities are burned, what can we do? Trade routes snapped like frayed ropes. The Hittite Empire, once a superpower, vanished so completely that later generations doubted it had ever existed. Egypt, though it survived, reeled from repeated invasions, its temples later carving reliefs of chaotic battles against mysterious warriors with horned helmets and feather-topped ships. Into this unraveling world surged the Sea Peoples, not a single tribe but a swirling confederation of raiders and migrants, their origins as murky as the depths they sailed from. Some scholars link them to displaced groups from the collapsing Mycenaean world or Anatolia's fractured kingdoms. Others suggest they were seafarers pushed by famine or drawn by opportunity. What's undeniable is their impact. They weren't just attackers but catalysts, accelerating collapses already brewing from drought, rebellions, and trade breakdowns. At Megiddo and other sites, archaeologists find shattered pottery styles mid-layer, evidence of cultures abruptly replaced. The sea itself became a highway of chaos, with shipwrecks like the Uluburr off Turkey's coast, a time capsule of a trade network in freefall, its cargo of ivory, glass, and weapons now silent on the seafloor. Yet the greatest mystery isn't their violence but their invisibility. These were people who toppled empires yet left no chronicles, no temples, not even a name for themselves beyond what their enemies called them. Every trace of them is borrowed, a shadow play on Egyptian temple walls, a fragment in a survivor's lament. How could a force so transformative vanish without leaving a single word of their own? The answer may lie in the very nature of collapse. When the scribes stop writing, when the cities fall silent, even the conquerors can slip through the cracks of history. The Egyptians called them the Sea Peoples, a name that echoes through history not as a self-given title, but as a label stamped by their terrified enemies. The most vivid glimpses we have of them come from the temple walls of Medinet Habu, where Pharaoh Ramses III immortalized his victory over them in sweeping, chaotic reliefs. These carvings show warriors with horned helmets and feathered headdresses, their ships bristling with swords and shields, clashing against Egyptian forces in a desperate naval battle. Ramses claimed to have turned the tide, saving Egypt from annihilation, but his boasts are all we have. Not a single inscription, not one clay tablet, bears the voice of the Sea Peoples themselves. So who were these enigmatic raiders? Scholars have spent decades piecing together clues from scattered sources, and the picture that emerges is anything but clear. Some believe they were displaced populations, refugees fleeing collapsing societies like the Mycenaeans or Hittites, forced onto the seas by famine or invasion. Others argue they were opportunistic pirates, drawn to the rich coasts of the Mediterranean like moths to flame, exploiting the chaos of a world in upheaval. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a loose alliance of different groups, bound not by blood but by desperation and shared ambition. The names Ramses and other Egyptian scribes gave them only deepen the mystery. The Sherdon, often shown with distinctive round shields and horned helmets, may have come from Sardinia or the Aegean. The Peliset, later linked to the Philistines of biblical fame, might have originated in the Greek islands or Anatolia. Then there were the Lucca, the Shekelesh, the Denian names that hint at far-flung homelands but dissolve into speculation. What's striking is how these identities, once feared across the ancient world, vanish from the record after the turmoil subsides. Did they settle down, assimilate, or simply disappear? The absence of their own written records is perhaps the most haunting gap in this puzzle. Most ancient conquerors, whether the Assyrians, Babylonians, or Romans, left behind monuments, chronicles, even poetry to proclaim their deeds. But the Sea People's silence is deafening. Could it be that they were illiterate, a warrior culture that valued the sword over the stylus? Or did their stories perish with them, lost in the same fires that consumed the cities they sacked? Without their own words, we're left with the biased accounts of their victims, like trying to reconstruct a civilization from the warnings of its enemies. This silence forces us to ask a deeper question. How much of history belongs only to those who wrote it? The Sea Peoples reshaped the Mediterranean, toppling empires and redrawing borders, yet they remain ghosts in their own story. Their legacy isn't in libraries or temples, but in the ruins they left behind, and in the unsettling reminder that even the mightiest forces can fade into the shadows, leaving only echoes behind. The identity of the Sea Peoples remains one of history's most tantalizing riddles, a puzzle with pieces scattered across crumbling ruins and cryptic inscriptions. Scholars have spun countless theories, each offering a different lens through which to view these enigmatic raiders. One prevailing idea suggests they weren't conquerors at all, but refugees, desperate bands of people fleeing the collapse of their own civilizations. Imagine the Mycenaean palaces, once vibrant with trade and artistry, now abandoned as drought and unrest spread. Could the Sea Peoples have been displaced survivors, pushed onto the seas in search of new homes, their violence born of necessity rather than ambition? Others argue they were opportunistic nomads of the waves, a loose coalition of pirates and mercenaries who saw the Mediterranean's weakening empires as ripe for plunder. The Egyptian records hint at this, labeling distinct groups like the Sherdon and Peliset, each with unique armor and weapons. These names might hold linguistic clues. Some scholars tie the Peliset to the Philistines of biblical fame, while the Sherdon's round shields and horned helmets resemble artifacts found as far away as Sardinia. But these connections are fragile, built on syllable echoes and artistic styles that could easily be coincidences. The truth is, every theory hits a wall, the absence of the Sea People's own voices. Without their writings, we're left decoding them through the biases of their enemies. Even their name, Sea Peoples, is an outsider's term, a label slapped on them by scribes who saw them as little more than a force of nature. This silence fuels endless speculation. Were they a single culture or a patchwork of clans united only by circumstance? Did they vanish because they were absorbed into the lands they ravaged, or because they were never a coherent group to begin with? One thing is certain, their mystery is as much about the gaps in history as it is about the fragments we've found. And if their origins are elusive, their methods were devastatingly clear. Their military strategies, swift, unpredictable, and brutally effective, would reshape warfare in ways that still echo today. But that's a story for another moment. The Sea Peoples didn't just attack, they dominated the waves with a style of naval warfare that left empires scrambling. Unlike the lumbering galleys of established powers, their ships were built for speed and surprise, sleek vessels designed to strike fast and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. The reliefs at Medinet Habu offer a rare glimpse into their tactics. Rows of warriors crowded onto high-prowed ships, their shields locked in tight formations, while archers and spearmen rain chaos onto the shores. What's striking isn't just their aggression, but their adaptability. Their helmets, some horned, others crested with feathers, hint at a melting pot of influences, as if their crews were stitched together from the fragments of collapsed cultures, each bringing their own weapons and tricks to the fight. This wasn't the orderly combat of phalanxes or chariot charges. The Sea Peoples fought like a storm, overwhelming coastal cities with relentless, unpredictable strikes. Imagine a fortified harbor at dawn, sentries barely awake, when suddenly the horizon fills with strange sails. By the time the alarm sounds, raiders are already leaping onto docks, torching granaries, and slipping back into the sea before heavy infantry can rally. Their targets weren't just armies but the lifelines of civilization, ports, trade hubs, the very nodes that kept empires fed and funded. A single raid could cripple a region for years, and the psychological toll was even worse. The terror of their mobility made them seem unstoppable, a shadow that could materialize anywhere, anytime. Egypt's records paint them as a tidal wave of chaos, but their success wasn't just brute force. They exploited weaknesses in the Old World's defenses. Bronze Age kingdoms relied on fortresses and standing armies, slow to mobilize and tied to the land. The Sea Peoples, by contrast, had no capital to besiege, no fields to burn in retaliation. They lived on their ships, turning the Mediterranean itself into their base. When the Hittites or Mycenaeans sent envoys to beg allies for help, messages took weeks to arrive, plenty of time for the raiders to strike again and vanish. Yet their greatest advantage might have been their very anonymity. With no written records, no monuments to defend, they left nothing for historians to trace but wreckage. Were they pirates, migrants, or revolutionaries? The answer might be all three. In a world rigid with hierarchy, they were the wild card, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous force isn't the strongest empire, but the one that refuses to play by the rules. The destruction left in the wake of the Sea Peoples reads like a litany of lost worlds. Once great cities reduced to smoldering ruins, their stories preserved only in layers of ash and the frantic words of those who saw them fall. Take Ugarit, a thriving port city on the Syrian coast, its warehouses stuffed with ivory, bronze, and jars of precious resin. A single clay tablet, baked hard by the fire that consumed the city, captures its final moments, a desperate plea for help sent to the nearby kingdom of Elashia. Enemy ships have come, it reads. Our cities are burned, the fields are ruined, what can we do? The reply never came. Ugarit's gates were breached, its streets littered with hastily discarded valuables, as if its people fled mid-breakfast, leaving behind half-eaten meals still sitting in their bowls. Then there was Hattusa, the towering capital of the Hittite Empire, its massive stone walls meant to withstand sieges for years. Yet when the Sea People's shadow fell, the city didn't just fall, it was erased so thoroughly that later generations forgot it had ever existed. Archaeologists digging through its ruins find no grand last stand, just eerie silence. Charred timbers, shattered pottery, and royal archives deliberately smashed, as if to wipe the Hittites from memory. Even their treasures were left behind, buried in panic gold seals and ceremonial weapons hidden beneath floors, never reclaimed. The pattern repeats across the Mediterranean. At Megiddo, a strategic fortress in the Levant, a thick layer of ash marks the moment civilization unraveled. In Mycenae, the citadel of legendary kings, palace walls collapsed under their own weight, their frescoes of chariots and feasts buried under debris. Unlike the calculated conquests of empires like Assyria or Egypt, campaigns mapped out by scribes, with clear goals and prisoners paraded in triumph, the Sea People's destruction feels chaotic, almost impersonal. They didn't occupy, they obliterated. Yet amid the ruins, survivors tried to make sense of the nightmare. Egyptian scribes, safe behind the Nile's defenses, carved their accounts into temple walls, depicting the invaders as monstrous figures with wild hairstyles and foreign weapons. A single line from the Harris Papyrus, written years later, sums up the trauma. They came from the sea, and none could stand before them. Even Homer, weaving myth centuries afterward, might have preserved echoes of this terror in his tales of wandering heroes and cities sacked by mysterious peoples of the sea. What's chilling isn't just the scale of the devastation, but how abruptly the world's memory of these places faded. The Hittites, who once rivaled Egypt, became mere whispers in later Greek legends. Ugarit's language, a bridge between cultures, fell silent forever. The Sea Peoples didn't just destroy cities, they severed threads of history, leaving gaps we're still straining to fill. And as the survivors struggled to rebuild, they faced a question that haunts us today. How do you tell the story of a catastrophe when even the conquerors vanish without a trace? Egypt stood as the last great empire facing the storm of the Sea Peoples, and its survival hinged on a single, desperate battle. Pharaoh Ramses III, ruling a kingdom already weakened by internal strife and economic strain, knew the stakes when strange ships appeared on the horizon. The reliefs at his mortuary temple of Medinet Habu tell the story in dramatic detail: waves choked with enemy vessels, Egyptian archers raining arrows from the shore, and the chaotic melee of hand-to-hand combat along the Nile Delta. Ramses claimed a crushing victory, boasting that he had cut down those who came from the sea and saved Egypt from annihilation. But how much of this was truth, and how much was the carefully crafted propaganda of a pharaoh desperate to project strength? The so-called Battle of the Delta, immortalized in stone and ink, reveals as much about Egypt's propaganda machine as it does about the Sea Peoples. Ramses' inscriptions describe his forces luring the invaders into the Nile's shallow branches, where their agile ships became trapped like fish in a net. Egyptian marines, supported by land forces, allegedly turned the waterways red with enemy blood. Yet there's a curious omission: no mention of Egyptian losses, no acknowledgement of the devastation that surely preceded this clash. The Harris Papyrus, a later document celebrating Ramses' reign, goes further, painting the Sea Peoples as cosmic forces of chaos, their defeat a divine mandate. They were made ashes, it declares, their hearts and souls finished for all eternity. Such language feels less like history and more like myth-making, designed to cement Ramses' legacy as the savior of a battered civilization. Beneath the grand narratives, though, lie subtle clues that Egypt's victory was anything but clean. Archaeological evidence suggests widespread disruption, abandoned settlements in the delta, disrupted trade routes, and a sharp decline in the quality of royal monuments, hinting at drained coffers. Even the Medinet Habu reliefs betray tension. Among the scenes of triumph, there are captive Sea Peoples being integrated into Egypt's army as mercenaries, their distinct helmets now serving the pharaoh. This wasn't just a defeated enemy, it was a forced compromise, an admission that some invaders couldn't be destroyed, only absorbed. What's undeniable is that Egypt's survival, however precarious, preserved the only written records of the Sea People's rampage. Without Ramses' inscriptions, we might know nothing of their ships, their weapons, or their terrifying reach. But this raises a haunting question. If even Egypt, the mightiest kingdom of the age, had to spin its survival as a flawless triumph, how much worse must the devastation have been for those who left no records at all? The pharaoh's chisel may have carved the Sea Peoples into history, but it also carved them into a story, one where the victors write the script and the vanquished vanish into silence. The silence of the vanquished speaks louder than any victory inscription. When the Sea Peoples swept through the Mediterranean, they didn't just topple cities, they erased voices. Think about it, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, Ugarit, these were societies with scribes, with archives, with proud traditions of recording their triumphs. Yet not a single tablet, not one surviving document from these cultures tells their side of the story. Why? The simplest answer is also the most brutal. Survival comes before record keeping. When your city is burning, you don't stop to chisel your defeat into stone. You run, but there's more to it than panic. Consider Carthage after the Punic Wars, a civilization so thoroughly scrubbed from history by Rome that we rely on their conquerors' accounts to piece together their legacy. Victors don't just write history, they often erase the losers' voices entirely. For the Bronze Age collapses, the pattern is eerily similar. The Sea Peoples may not have systematically destroyed records, but in the chaos they unleashed, who was left to preserve them? Scribes were likely among the first to perish or flee, their clay tablets baked into unintentional time capsules by the very fires that ended their world. There's another, darker possibility. Trauma silences memory. Societies recovering from catastrophe often avoid memorializing their humiliation. Imagine a Mycenaean survivor picking through the rubble of Pylos. Would they carve a tribute to the invaders who reduced their palace to ash? Or would they bury the pain, rebuilding without looking back? The Hebrew Bible offers a clue. It mentions the Philistines, likely descendants of the Sea People's Peliset group, but frames them as eternal enemies, not the architects of a near apocalypse. Even Egypt, which survived, never chronicled the full scale of the crisis beyond Ramses' triumphalist carvings. This silence isn't unique to antiquity. Think of the Mongols, whose conquests left piles of skulls but few first-hand accounts from their victims, or the Aztecs, whose codices were burned by Spanish priests. What's chilling about the Sea Peoples is how their anonymity became their legacy. They didn't need to write their history, their chaos did it for them. By unraveling the networks that preserved knowledge, they ensured their enemies' stories died with them. In a way, their greatest power wasn't the sword, but the void they left behind. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying force isn't the one that shouts its name, but the one that slips away without a whisper. The ruins left behind by the Sea Peoples may be silent, but the dirt beneath them speaks volumes. Take the pottery shards unearthed in ancient Philistine cities like Ashkelon and Ekron, crumbling fragments that hold explosive clues. Before the upheaval, these regions produced elegant, locally made wares with intricate designs. Then, suddenly, archaeologists find layers filled with starkly different styles. Rough, handmade ceramics decorated with bold spirals and bird motifs, completely foreign to the Levant. These aren't just new pots, they're cultural fingerprints matching designs found in the Aegean and Cyprus. It's as if entire populations arrived overnight, bringing their kitchens and their identities with them. Even more telling are the shipwrecks. Off the coast of Turkey, at the underwater site of Cape Gelidonia, lies a vessel that sank amid the chaos of the 12th century BCE. Its cargo, a tangle of copper ingots, weapons, and personal seals, reads like a manifest of collapsing empires. But it's the Uluburun wreck just miles away that truly rewrites the story. This ship carried treasures from at least 7 different cultures: Egyptian gold, Mycenaean swords, Baltic amber, even a carved ivory writing board that may have belonged to a royal scribe. Was this a trader's vessel caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or evidence of the Sea People's patchwork alliances? The wreck's sheer diversity suggests a Mediterranean world where old borders meant nothing, and where desperate groups banded together to survive. Now, science is peeling back layers no scribe ever recorded. DNA analysis of bones from Philistine graves reveals genetic links to southern Europe, confirming what pottery styles hinted at. Isotope testing on teeth from Sardinia shows individuals who spent childhoods far from the island, possibly as displaced migrants. Even the humble remains of ancient meals, olive pits, fish bones, and charred grains paint a picture of sudden dietary shifts in conquered cities as new rulers imposed their tastes alongside their rule. These aren't just artifacts, they're time machines. Every broken amphora, every waterlogged sword, whispers a truth the victors tried to bury. That history belongs not just to those who write it, but to those who lived it. And as technology advances, who knows what other secrets might rise from the earth or the sea? The question isn't just where the Sea Peoples went, it's what they became. After the fires cooled and the chaos subsided, these enigmatic raiders didn't vanish into thin air. Instead, the archaeological record whispers of their quiet assimilation, their identities blending into the cultures they once upended. Nowhere is this clearer than in the land of Canaan, where layers of excavated ruins reveal a startling transformation. Cities like Ashkelon and Ekron, once thriving Canaanite hubs, suddenly bear the marks of foreign settlers, pottery styles that leap from local designs to alien forms, hearths built in unfamiliar shapes, even dietary shifts visible in animal bones, more pork, a meat taboo in the region until then. These aren't the traces of conquest but of colonization. The most compelling link, the Philistines, biblical foes of the Israelites. they emerge in history just as the Sea Peoples fade from Egyptian records. The connection is etched in artifacts, pottery decorated with spiral motifs identical to Aegean designs, clay figurines of goddesses with upraised arms reminiscent of Mycenaean idols, and most tellingly distinctive headgear. Egyptian reliefs depict the Peliset, one Sea Peoples group wearing feathered crowns. Centuries later, Philistine warriors are shown with similar plumed helmets on Assyrian carvings. It's as if the invaders traded their ships for plows, their raids for roots, but assimilation wasn't peaceful erasure. At Tel Kassil, a Philistine settlement near modern Tel Aviv, archaeologists found a temple deliberately built atop a Canaanite shrine. Its orientation shifted to face the sea, a symbolic reclaiming of space by people who still looked homeward. Their pottery, initially pure Aegean in style, gradually absorbs Canaanite influences over generations, blending into something new. This cultural fusion birthed vibrant hybrid societies, their art a tapestry of borrowed motifs and stubborn traditions. Even their language left faint echoes. The Philistine word for ruler, seren, may derive from the Greek tyrannos, a linguistic fossil of their origins. The legacy of the Sea Peoples isn't just destruction, it's reinvention. Their disruption didn't just end civilizations, it forced new ones into being. Like a forest fire that clears the ground for fresh growth, their raids created vacuums where hybrid cultures could take root. The Philistines, once invaders, became vintners and architects, their cities buzzing with looms and olive presses. In Sardinia, the Nuragic culture suddenly adopts shield designs identical to those of the Shurden, another Sea Peoples group, suggesting trade or intermarriage. Even Egypt, despite its boasts of victory, absorbed Sea Peoples mercenaries into its armies, their distinctive helmets appearing in later battles as far south as Nubia. This raises a provocative thought. What if the Sea Peoples' greatest impact wasn't what they destroyed, but what they built? Their chaos scattered seeds of art, technology, even ideas across the Mediterranean. The very empires they toppled had grown stagnant, their trade networks rigid. The Sea Peoples, intentionally or not, forced a hard reset, paving the way for the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Israelites' cultures that would shape the ancient world's next chapter. Their silence in history isn't an absence, it's a presence woven into the fabric of what came after. They didn't just vanish, they became the neighbors, the rivals, and eventually the ancestors. And in that transformation, they proved a timeless truth: civilizations don't end, they evolve. History has a way of turning chaos into legend, and the Sea Peoples, so elusive in written records, may have left their mark in the myths that outlasted empires. Consider Homer's epic tales where shadowy sea raiders threaten the coasts of Greece, their origins as mysterious as their motives. Could these be distant echoes of the very real terror that swept the Mediterranean? The timing fits. The Trojan War, if it happened, unfolded in the same era of upheaval, with Homer's heroes battling not just rival kingdoms but the specter of maritime marauders. Even the description of Odysseus's encounters, fleets appearing without warning, coastal villages plundered, mirrors the fragmentary accounts of Sea Peoples' raids. It's as if the poet wove threads of collective memory into his verses, transforming history into something grander, yet no less haunting. Then there's the Bible's portrayal of the Philistines, those perennial foes of the Israelites, striding onto the scene with iron weapons and foreign gods. Scholars now link them to the Peliset, a Sea Peoples group named in Egyptian records. The parallels are striking. Both arrive suddenly from the sea, both settle in Canaan's coastal cities, and both clash with local powers in a struggle for dominance. The story of Samson tearing down the Philistine temple might even encode a cultural memory of these clashes, a metaphor for the seismic shifts the invaders brought. What's fascinating is how these narratives invert reality. To the Israelites, the Philistines were the aggressors, yet archaeology suggests they were themselves displaced, refugees turned conquerors in a chain reaction of collapse. Beyond the Mediterranean, traces of the Sea People's legacy might lurk in even older traditions. The ancient Greeks spoke of the Dorians, a wave of outsiders who supposedly descended from the north to overthrow the Mycenaean kingdoms. Some historians speculate this was a garbled retelling of the broader Bronze Age collapse, with the Dorians standing in for the Sea People's chaos. Even Egyptian mythology might hold clues. The Book of Gates, a funerary text, describes apocalyptic battles against serpentine forces of disorder. Could these metaphors reflect the trauma of real invasions, repackaged as cosmic strife? Oral traditions, though fragile, have a way of preserving what stone tablets cannot. In Sardinia, folk legends tell of giants who arrived by sea, wielding strange weapons and building stone towers. The island's Neuragic culture, which flourished around the time of the Sea Peoples, left behind precisely such towers, and intriguingly, Sardinia has yielded bronze figurines of warriors with round shields and horned helmets, identical to those of the Sherden, another Sea People's faction. Coincidence or a whisper of truth passed down through generations? The challenge is untangling history from myth, especially when the invaders left no chronicles of their own. But perhaps that's the point. The Sea Peoples didn't need to write their story. It was etched into the fears and folklore of those who survived them. Their legacy lives on not in archives, but in the shudder of a hero's tale, the villain of a sacred text, the half-remembered storm that reshaped the world. And in that sense, they achieved a kind of immortality, not as a people, but as an idea, the eternal stranger at the gate, the sea that gives and takes without mercy. The Mediterranean of the late Bronze Age wasn't just a stage for empires, it was an ecosystem teetering on the edge. Recent studies of ancient tree rings tell a startling story. 3 centuries of severe droughts, peaking right when the Sea Peoples emerged. Oak samples from Anatolia show narrow, desperate growth rings in the 12th century BC, betraying years when rain failed and crops withered. At the same time, ice cores from Greenland reveal volcanic ash layers from massive eruptions, one in Iceland around 1159 BC, that may have plunged the region into a volcanic winter, dropping temperatures and choking skies with sulfur. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces align, collapsing harvests, starving populations, and desperate migrations that turned fishermen into raiders. This wasn't just bad weather, it was a cascade of catastrophe. In Hittite clay tablets, frantic pleas for grain shipments multiply as their storehouses empty. One reads, "There is famine in our house, we will die of hunger." Egypt's Nile, usually reliable, recorded abnormally low floods, its life-giving waters reduced to a trickle. For societies built on brittle agricultural systems, these weren't hardships but existential threats. Imagine entire villages abandoning their fields, joining roving bands in search of food, their desperation curdling into violence. The Sea People's infamous raids might not have been calculated conquests, but survival strategies gone global, a domino effect of hunger pushing populations toward richer lands. Yet climate alone doesn't explain the scale of destruction. The difference between migration and invasion often comes down to reception. When the Hittites or Mycenaeans, themselves reeling from drought, barred their gates to starving newcomers, conflict became inevitable. A shipwreck off Uluburan tells this tragic irony. Its cargo included Cypriot copper and Canaanite jars, precisely the trade goods that once eased shortages, now sinking uselessly to the seabed as the networks that distributed them collapsed. Even the Sea People's famed naval agility takes on new meaning. These weren't just warships but mobile communities, carrying families and livestock. Their attacks less about empire building than forced resettlement. The question lingers, were they villains or victims? Egyptian carvings depict them as demonic hordes, but history is written by those with full bellies. Modern parallels sting with relevance. Today's climate refugees, turned away at borders, labeled threats rather than survivors of shared disasters. The Sea People's greatest legacy might be this uncomfortable mirror. Civilizations rarely fall to outsiders alone. They crack first from within, weakened by droughts they couldn't control, by systems too rigid to adapt. And when the desperate come knocking, the choice isn't just how to fight them, but whether we recognize ourselves in their hunger. The Mediterranean's once thriving trade networks were the lifeblood of Bronze Age empires. Copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, olive oil from Crete, all flowing along well-guarded maritime routes. These weren't just commercial exchanges, they were the glue holding kingdoms together. The Hittites relied on imported grain to feed their armies. Egypt needed Aegean silver to pay its workers, and Mycenaean palaces stockpiled exotic goods as symbols of power. Then came the cracks. A single shipwreck tells the story. The Uluburan vessel, laden with 10 tons of copper ingots, glass, and ebony, sank off the Turkish coast around 1300 BC. Its cargo, a snapshot of interconnected prosperity, would soon become unimaginable. By the time the Sea People surged onto the scene, this system was already unraveling. Droughts had choked harvests, rebellions fractured kingdoms, and pirates, perhaps early Sea Peoples themselves, began nibbling at the edges. But what started as opportunistic theft soon became systemic plunder. With no central authority to patrol the seas, the raiders didn't just attack ships, they became the new middlemen. Imagine a coastline where every safe harbor now answered to strangers in feathered helmets, where merchants paid protection fees in weapons and grain just to unload their wares. The Egyptians called it the Great Green Chaos, their once predictable trade partners replaced by unpredictable predators. The economic collapse was catastrophic in its asymmetry. Bronze Age palaces operated on rigid redistribution systems. Kings collected taxes in grain and goods, then redistributed them to loyal subjects. When the Sea Peoples severed these supply chains, the entire model imploded. At Pylos, linear B tablets record desperate rationing as bronze workers and perfume makers vanished from the payrolls, their specialized trades unsustainable without imported materials. In Cyprus, copper mines fell silent as shipping lanes grew too dangerous. Even something as simple as a potter's wheel became scarce. Archaeologists find villages reverting to handmade ceramics, a telltale sign of broken trade networks. Yet amid the ruins, a fascinating paradox emerged. The very piracy that crippled empires also seeded new economies. The Sea Peoples didn't just take, they redistributed wealth in ways that shattered old hierarchies. Hordes of looted gold and silver, buried during raids, later resurfaced in unexpected places. Sardinia, Sicily, the Levant, evidence of a thriving black market. Their decentralized violence gave rise to equally decentralized trade. Phoenician merchants, once minor players, exploited the power vacuum, establishing agile new routes that bypassed fallen kingdoms. The alphabet they developed, a simplified writing system perfect for contracts and cargo lists, would eventually spread across the Mediterranean, a tool born from necessity in this fractured world. The starkest contrast lies in what came after. Before the Sea Peoples, economies were vertical. Wealth flowed up to palaces and down through bureaucracies. Afterward, they became horizontal, with coastal villages trading directly with each other, no longer waiting for royal permission. At Tel Abu Hawam, a humble port in modern-day Israel, archaeologists found layers of imported Greek pottery alongside local wares. Not the carefully curated imports of elite palaces, but the pragmatic choices of everyday traders. This wasn't decline, it was reinvention. The old system had been too brittle, too dependent on centralized control. The Sea Peoples, intentionally or not, forced the Mediterranean to diversify, setting the stage for the dynamic Iron Age economies that would follow. Perhaps their most enduring economic legacy was the death of monopoly. When Ramses III boasted of defeating the Sea Peoples, he failed to mention that Egypt's subsequent wealth came from embracing their methods, employing Shurden mercenaries as enforcers, copying their ship designs, and engaging in the very piracy they'd once condemned. The lesson was clear. In a world where power no longer resided solely in throne rooms, adaptability trumped tradition. The Sea Peoples didn't just plunder gold, they stole the illusion of control, leaving behind a Mediterranean where fortunes could be made or lost by anyone bold enough to sail into the unknown. The Sea Peoples didn't just outfight their enemies, they outthought them. While Bronze Age empires clung to traditional weapons and tactics, these mysterious raiders may have wielded game-changing innovations that rewrote the rules of warfare. Take their iconic horned helmets immortalized in Egyptian carvings. At first glance, they seem like mere decoration, but experiments with reconstructed designs reveal a terrifying practicality. The curled horns deflected sword blows, turning what looked like ceremonial headgear into functional armor. And their swords, unlike the long, thrusting rapiers favored by Mycenaean elites, Sea Peoples' blades were shorter, leaf-shaped, and brutally efficient for close-quarters combat on rocking ship decks. These weren't weapons for honorable duels, but tools for butchery in the chaos of a boarding action. Their naval technology might have been even more revolutionary. Egyptian reliefs depict sleek, high-prowed vessels unlike the bulky galleys of established powers. Modern shipbuilders analyzing these images note ingenious features: raised platforms for archers, reinforced bows for ramming, and symmetrical designs allowing sudden changes in direction. While Phoenician and Egyptian ships needed calm seas and steady winds, Sea Peoples' boats likely mastered the art of tacking against the wind, giving them unmatched mobility. A clay model found in Cyprus shows just how radical this was: a warship with a detachable mast, suggesting they could strike swiftly under sail, then disappear into shallow inlets by rowing. Yet the most telling clue lies in what they didn't use. Contemporary armies relied on chariots, expensive, terrain-limited status symbols requiring trained crews and flat battlefields. The Sea Peoples abandoned them entirely, focusing instead on flexible infantry and naval power. In a world where kingdoms measured strength by chariot counts, this wasn't backwardness, it was foresight. When Hittite forces got bogged down in muddy river plains, or Mycenaean princes found their prized chariots useless on rocky coasts, the Sea Peoples' adaptability became their deadliest weapon. Metal analysis adds another layer. While Bronze Age smiths carefully alloyed copper and tin, Sea Peoples' weapons show crude but effective improvisation: arsenic bronze when tin ran short, repurposed metal from looted statues and temple doors. This wasn't the refined craftsmanship of palace workshops, but the ruthless pragmatism of survivors. A dagger dredged from the sea near Crete bears the scars of this approach, its blade recycled from a shattered spearhead, its hilt wrapped with salvaged ship rope instead of precious ivory. But were they true innovators or just brilliant adapters? The answer might lie between cultures. Their round shields mirror those of Sardinia's Nuragic people, while their feathered headdresses resemble Aegean frescoes. Even their famous biomedical swords, with ribbed blades for strength, appear first in Central Europe before showing up in Sea Peoples' hands. This paints them not as inventors, but as history's greatest scavengers of military tech, cherry-picking the deadliest ideas from collapsing civilizations and combining them into something unprecedented. The irony is palpable. While empires poured resources into perfecting traditional weapons, the Sea People's advantage came from having no tradition at all. Unburdened by ritual or orthodoxy, they fought with whatever worked, turning the Mediterranean's chaos into their arsenal. Their greatest innovation wasn't a sword or ship, it was the willingness to break all the rules. And in that breaking, they changed warfare forever. The question of whether the Sea Peoples fought as a unified force or a scattered collection of rogue bands hinges on one crucial contradiction: Egypt's own records. On the walls of Medinet Habu, Pharaoh Ramses III's artists carved two conflicting narratives. In some scenes, the invaders appear as a disorganized mob, their ships crashing haphazardly into Egyptian formations, warriors tumbling into the Nile under volleys of arrows. But elsewhere, the same relief shows startling coordination. Ships advancing in disciplined lines, archers covering infantry with synchronized volleys, and distinct units wielding specialized weapons. This wasn't just artistic license, it suggests the Sea People's greatest strength lay in their ability to toggle between chaos and order as the situation demanded. Archaeology adds nuance to this puzzle. At the ruins of Ugarit, excavations reveal not just destruction but targeted strikes, granaries burned first, arsenals looted systematically, and key roads blocked. This implies reconnaissance planning, perhaps even insider knowledge, yet nearby other sites show indiscriminate carnage, with no apparent strategy beyond pillage. The likeliest explanation: the Sea Peoples operated as a coalition, not a monolith. Think of them less like a modern army and more like a pirate confederacy, allied when it served their interests, fracturing when it didn't. Egyptian texts hint at this, naming multiple groups: Shurden, Peliset, Lukka, each with distinct armor and tactics. A Shurden warrior's round shield and horned helmet would have stood starkly beside a Peliset soldier's feathered crest and long thrusting spear. Their command structure might have been equally fluid. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of Bronze Age kingdoms, where kings and generals dictated every move, the Sea Peoples likely followed charismatic warlords elected for specific campaigns. The Uluburan shipwreck offers a clue. Its cargo included a golden scarab inscribed with the name Nefertiti, possibly plundered from Egypt decades earlier. This wasn't just loot, it was a status symbol, the kind of treasure used to buy loyalty among rival captains. What truly set them apart was their adaptability. When facing Egypt's organized defenses, they mirrored its discipline, as seen in the Battle of the Delta's coordinated naval assault. But against fragmented city-states like Ugarit, they switched to lightning raids, exploiting disarray. This chameleon-like approach made them unpredictable and terrifying. A Mycenaean clay tablet complains of sea raiders who fight like lions one day and vanish like mist the next, capturing the essence of their elusive leadership. The ultimate irony, their lack of centralization, often seen as a weakness, became their survival tactic. While empires collapsed under the weight of their own bureaucracies, the Sea Peoples thrived by remaining just coherent enough to strike decisively, and just scattered enough to never present a single target. In that sense, they weren't just warriors. They were pioneers of a new kind of warfare, one where flexibility trumped tradition, and where the line between anarchy and strategy blurred into something history had never seen before. The Sea Peoples didn't so much vanish as they dissolved like salt into water, their presence fading until only traces remained. Unlike the dramatic collapses they inflicted on others, their own end came quietly, a slow unraveling rather than a decisive finale. Archaeologists sifting through layers of 12th century BC settlements find no grand battlefields marked by their distinctive weapons, no mass graves filled with their horned helmets. Instead, the clues lie in subtle shifts, pottery styles blending into local traditions, burial practices adopting native customs, and once feared warriors appearing in court records as mercenaries or farmers. Take the Philistines, likely descendants of the Peliset faction. By the time the Hebrew Bible mentions them, they've traded their seaborne raids for territorial disputes, their identity crystallizing into that of settled rivals rather than nomadic terrors. Excavations at Ashkelon reveal this transformation in real time. Early layers show Aegean-style hearths and pottery, but within a few generations, these give way to Levantine designs. Even their diet changes, with pig bones, once abundant in early Philistine sites, dwindling as they adapt to local taboos. This wasn't defeat, it was assimilation, a gradual surrender to the rhythms of the land they'd once plundered. Elsewhere, the story repeats with variations. On Sardinia, the Neuragic culture suddenly sprouts bronze figurines wearing the same round shields and horned helmets as the Shurden, another Sea Peoples group. But these aren't war trophies, they're local innovations, suggesting the newcomers didn't conquer so much as collaborate. Their martial expertise traded for a place in the island's power structure. Similarly, in Egypt, temple records from the reign of Ramses III onward list Shurden warriors serving in the pharaoh's guard, their foreign names slowly giving way to Egyptian ones over generations. Yet some groups may have met darker fates. The Lucca, linked to coastal Anatolia, vanish from records entirely after the upheaval, their homeland scoured by fires and later overrun by new waves of migrants. A single Hittite tablet written in the empire's death throes hints at their desperation. The Lucca lands are barren, their people scattered like chaff. Were they wiped out in some forgotten battle, or did they simply disperse, their identity eroding into the chaos of the age? The lack of a clear endpoint isn't just a gap in the record, it's a testament to their elusive nature. These were people who thrived in the margins, slipping between the cracks of empires. When the dust settled, some likely became the very farmers and craftsmen whose villages they'd once raided, their pasts buried beneath new lives. Others may have sailed beyond the Mediterranean's horizon, their stories lost to deeper seas. What's haunting is how thoroughly they became what they'd destroyed. The same forces that made them fearsome, their adaptability, their lack of a fixed homeland also ensured they left no monuments to their own glory. Their legacy isn't carved in stone, but woven into the DNA of the societies they reshaped, a silent ghost in the bloodline of history. And perhaps that's the final irony. The Sea Peoples who erased so many were themselves erased by time, not with fire and sword, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide receding. History never repeats itself, but it often rhymes, and the echoes of the Sea Peoples' disruptions resonate in unexpected ways today. Consider the climate pressures that may have driven their migrations. Prolonged droughts, crop failures, rising temperatures, these weren't just Bronze Age problems. Modern satellite imagery shows coastlines eroding, deserts expanding, and island nations negotiating for higher ground, mirroring the environmental stresses that likely pushed ancient populations toward desperate journeys. The difference: today's climate, refugees board inflatable rafts instead of warships, yet the root impulse remains the same, the need to survive when homelands become unlivable. The parallels in warfare are equally striking. The Sea Peoples' hit-and-run tactics, striking soft targets, vanishing before counterattacks, mirror modern asymmetric conflicts where decentralized forces outmaneuver traditional armies. Think of guerrilla fighters blending into civilian populations, or cyber attacks crippling infrastructure without a single soldier crossing a border. The Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu, showing invaders targeting granaries and ports, could almost illustrate contemporary doctrines of economic warfare. Both eras reveal a brutal truth: when the rules of engagement change, the most adaptable force wins, whether they wield bronze swords or drones. yet these comparisons demand nuance. Unlike today's documented refugee crises, the Sea Peoples left no diaries or interviews, only the fear they etched into their enemies' records. And while modern nations debate immigration policies, the Bronze Age had no United Nations, no asylum protocols, just the stark law of survival. What unites both eras is the human element, the desperation of those forced to move, and the fear of those watching them arrive. A Mycenaean noble barricading his palace against strangers from the sea might sound eerily familiar to a modern voter fearing cultural displacement. The most poignant parallel lies in resilience. Just as the Philistines eventually became vintners and olive growers, today's displaced populations often reshape their new homes in profound ways. Syrian refugees in Germany revive abandoned villages. Venezuelan entrepreneurs energize Colombian markets, proof that migration's chaos can seed renewal. Perhaps the Sea People's ultimate lesson isn't about destruction but transformation, how societies, when fractured, can reassemble into something unexpected. The past doesn't offer solutions, but it does whisper warnings about the cost of rigidity, the power of desperation, and the inevitability of change. The idea of the Sea Peoples as a single, homogeneous horde bent solely on destruction is one of history's most persistent oversimplifications. Modern archaeology paints a far more nuanced picture, one where these enigmatic groups were as likely to trade as they were to raid, and where their identities blurred across cultures rather than fitting neatly into a single category. Take the famous reliefs at Medinet Habu. While they depict brutal battles, they also show captured Sea Peoples being integrated into Egyptian society as mercenaries and craftsmen. If they were truly nothing but mindless destroyers, why would Ramses III bother to enlist them? Scholars like Eric Klein and Louise Hitchcock point to evidence of Sea Peoples engaging in complex economic exchanges long before their raids began. At the port of Tel Abu Hawam in modern-day Israel, layers of pottery styles mingle local Canaanite jars alongside Aegean-style vessels, suggesting trade relationships that predate the violence. Even more telling are the shipwrecks. The Cape Gelidonia wreck off Turkey's coast contained not just weapons but carefully packed ingots of copper and tin, the raw materials of Bronze Age commerce. This wasn't the cargo of pirates, it was the inventory of merchants, or perhaps opportunistic groups who knew when to swap a sword for a scale. The myth of their racial purity crumbles under genetic analysis. DNA studies of Philistine remains at Ashkelon reveal a population with mixed ancestry, Southern European genes layered over Levantine roots. These weren't invaders who stayed apart. They intermarried, adopted local customs, and blended into the fabric of the societies they encountered. Even their infamous horned helmets, once seen as a tribal hallmark, turn out to have precedents from Sardinia to Syria, suggesting a shared military fashion rather than a racial signature. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect is their role as catalysts rather than conquerors. At sites like Ugarit, destruction layers coincide not just with Sea Peoples' raids but with internal revolts and famines. Archaeologist Jesse Milek argues that some Sea Peoples' attacks might have been desperate collaborations, dispossessed locals joining forces with outsiders against crumbling elites. A tablet from Amar in Syria hints at this, describing a city's fall to our own people and the strangers from the sea. The line between invader and ally was often as shifting as the tides they sailed. This reframing doesn't absolve them of violence, but it complicates the narrative in fascinating ways. The Shurden, once feared as raiders, later appear as elite bodyguards for Egyptian pharaohs. The Peliset, remembered as biblical villains, became skilled olive oil producers whose presses dotted the Levant. Even their name, Sea Peoples, reflects the bias of their enemies, a label that flattens their diversity into a single threatening blur. What emerges isn't a story of mindless destruction, but of chaos and reinvention. They weren't just the end of something, they were the beginning too, a reminder that history's so-called dark ages are often just periods where the old rules no longer apply and new ones haven't yet been written. The Sea Peoples didn't just tear down empires, they forced the Mediterranean to improvise, adapt, and eventually rebuild in ways no one could have predicted. And that legacy of disruption leading to unexpected renewal might be their most enduring contribution to the ancient world. Even after centuries of research, the Sea Peoples cling stubbornly to their mysteries, each answered question spawning 3 more. Where exactly did they come from? The Mediterranean's vast coastline offers too many possibilities. Some scholars point to Sardinia's Nuragic towers as proof the Shurden originated there, while others trace the Peliset's pottery styles back to Crete or Cyprus. But without written records, these are theories built on pottery shards and weapon designs, fragile as the shipwrecks they're pulled from. The irony is rich. A people who reshaped empires left no maps, no chronicles, not even a definitive list of their own tribes. Their language remains another tantalizing gap. Did they speak a lost Anatolian dialect, a Proto-Greek tongue? The few names we have, Shurden, Lucca, Peliset, hint at Indo-European roots, but they're whispers in a storm. Even the Philistines, their most famous descendants, left only a handful of words in Hebrew texts, like the term Seren for ruler, which might, or might not, be linked to Greek tyrannos. It's as if their voices were swallowed by the same seas they sailed. Most perplexing of all is their silence. Why didn't they carve their triumphs into stone as their enemies did? Perhaps they were illiterate warriors valuing action over inscription, or maybe their records were etched on perishable materials, wood, leather lost to time's decay. There's a darker possibility too, that winning mattered more than remembering. For nomadic raiders, legacy might have been written in plunder and fear, not clay tablets. These gaps aren't just academic, they're invitations. Amateur historians and archaeologists continue to chase clues in unlikely places. A fisherman spotting strange pottery in shallow waters, a hiker finding arrowheads near ancient coastlines. Modern DNA analysis offers new hope, tracing migration patterns through genetic markers. Even social media plays a role, with online forums dissecting pottery fragments or debating ship designs. The Sea People's greatest gift might be the puzzle they left behind, a reminder that history isn't just found in textbooks, but in the earth, the ocean, and the relentless curiosity of those still searching. Ugarit wasn't just a city, it was a jewel of the Bronze Age, a cosmopolitan hub where merchants from Egypt, Anatolia, and the Aegean haggled over ivory, purple dye, and cedar wood. Its libraries held treaties in 7 languages, its warehouses brimmed with goods from every corner of the Mediterranean. Then, in a single catastrophic season, it vanished. The ruins tell a story of panic frozen in time, half-eaten meals abandoned on tables, precious jewels scattered in streets, and most haunting of all, a kiln-fired clay tablet, its hurried cuneiform strokes preserving a plea that would never be answered. "Father," wrote the scribe to the king of Elashia, "enemy ships are already here. They have set fire to our cities and done terrible things. Can't you see we are perishing?" Excavations at Ugarit reveal a city caught mid-collapse. Archaeologists found workshops with tools still laid out, as if craftsmen had stepped away moments earlier. In one home, a family's final meal, fish bones and crushed olives, sat untouched beside overturned cups, the scene preserved under layers of ash. The city's north gate, where traders once unloaded goods from distant lands, became a bottleneck of chaos. Skeletons crushed beneath fallen bricks, their arms raised in futile defense. Even the palace archives, usually meticulously organized, showed signs of desperate last-minute searches, tablets ripped from shelves, as if someone had scrambled to save vital records before fleeing. The letters from Ugarit's final days read like a countdown to doom. One dispatch to Egypt begs for grain, revealing that the city's storerooms were already empty. Another, sent just weeks later, tersely notes, "No ships remain." The most chilling, though, is the one that never left, found still in its clay envelope near the western dock. It's addressed to a military commander. "When your messenger arrived, the enemy was already at our walls. We cannot see the sun for their arrows. Where are your troops?" The writing grows progressively sloppier, the last lines nearly illegible, as if the scribe's hand shook while the world burned around him. What makes Ugarit's fall uniquely heartbreaking is its preventable nature. This wasn't some isolated outpost, it was a key node in an international network, wealthy enough to afford mercenaries and fortified enough to withstand sieges. Yet its destruction came with eerie swiftness. The archaeological layers show no prolonged siege, no gradual starvation. Instead, there's a single, catastrophic fire layer sealing the city's fate. Weapon marks on the walls suggest the attackers didn't bother with ladders or siege engines. They simply overwhelmed the gates, implying either betrayal or paralyzing internal disorder. The real tragedy lies in what Ugarit's destruction represents, not just a city's end, but the unraveling of an entire world order. Its docks, once bustling with Egyptian grain ships and Mycenaean pottery traders, fell silent overnight. The multilingual scribes who smoothed commerce between empires were slaughtered or enslaved, their knowledge lost. In the ruins, archaeologists found a child's school tablet, a practice exercise with the same phrase repeated in Akkadian, Hurrian, and Cypro-Minoan. It's a tiny relic of the cultural fluency that made Ugarit thrive, and a stark reminder of how thoroughly that interconnected world was shattered. Perhaps most telling is what happened next, or rather, what didn't. Unlike other Bronze Age cities that rose again from their ashes, Ugarit remained abandoned for centuries. The few survivors who crept back built simple huts atop the ruins, their crude pottery a far cry from the fine imported wares of the past. The great libraries molded, the harbor silted up, and the trade routes shifted forever. In the end, Ugarit became exactly what the Sea Peoples left in their wake. Not just a ruined city, but a warning etched in clay and ash, proof that even the mightiest civilizations are just one bad season away from becoming someone else's archaeology. The image of Sea Peoples as lone warriors, sailing from battle to battle, misses a crucial human dimension: their families. Rare but revealing Egyptian carvings at Medinet Habu offer glimpses beyond the horned helmets and raised swords. In one scene, amidst the chaos of battle, a cluster of figures stands apart, women with long braided hair, their skirts swirling as they clutch infants to their chests, while older children grip the sides of rocking ships. These aren't the faceless hordes of pharaonic propaganda, they're entire communities on the move. This changes everything. Raiding parties might travel light, but families suggest something far more consequential: migration. A Mycenaean fresco fragment from Pylos, showing women in striped tunics boarding ships with woven baskets, hints at deliberate resettlement. At the Philistine site of Ashkelon, archaeologists unearthed spindle walls and loom weights alongside weapons, evidence that textile work, traditionally women's labor, continued even amid the upheaval. These weren't just fighters, they were weavers, potters, healers, carrying their domestic skills into new lands. The warrior-centric narrative also crumbles under forensic scrutiny. Skeletal remains from destroyed coastal cities show defensive wounds on female bones, some with arrowheads still embedded. At Tel-Es-Safi, a Philistine woman's grave contained not just jewelry but a dagger, her forearm bones thickened from years of strenuous activity. Were these women combatants or simply victims caught in the storm? The truth likely lies between a society where survival blurred traditional roles. Contrast this with Egyptian depictions of captive sea people's women, their foreign hairstyles and clothing meticulously detailed. Unlike the anonymous male prisoners, these figures are individualized, suggesting they held distinct cultural value. One temple relief even shows a Shirden woman nursing while bound, a poignant detail that undermines the idea of mindless barbarians. If the sea peoples were mere pirates, why document their families at all? Perhaps the most telling clue comes from genetics. DNA studies at Ashkelon reveal that Philistine children inherited genes from both Aegean mothers and local Canaanite fathers, proving intermarriage within a generation of arrival. This wasn't transient raiding, it was rooted colonization. The pottery tells the same story. Early Philistine settlements produced Aegean-style cooking pots ideal for boiling milk, a dietary staple foreign to the Levant. Who would prioritize transporting fragile milk cauldrons across treacherous seas unless feeding their own? The implications rewrite history's assumptions. A fleet carrying families moves differently, slower, more deliberately, seeking not just plunder but harbors safe for childbirth and harvests. It explains why some sea peoples groups, like the Peliset, transitioned so swiftly from invaders to olive growers. They weren't just conquering, they were putting down roots. Even their infamous naval agility takes on new meaning. High-prowed ships could have doubled as floating homes, their symmetrical designs allowing quick flight when protectors became prey. This shifts the sea peoples from faceless destroyers to something far more relatable: parents and children fleeing drought or war, their violence born of necessity rather than bloodlust. When the walls of Ugarit burned, it wasn't just warriors who perished, but families huddled in storerooms, their final moments preserved in the tiny sandals and broken toys buried under ash. History remembers the terror they inspired, but archaeology whispers of the terror they fled, a reminder that every invader might once have been someone clinging to a child in the dark, praying the next shore would be kinder than the last. The religious world of the sea peoples is a puzzle missing half its pieces: no temples, no sacred texts, only fragments whispering of beliefs as fluid as the seas they sailed. Among the most tantalizing clues are the terracotta figurines unearthed in Philistine cities like Ashkelon and Ekron. These small, crude statues depict women with exaggerated hips and upraised arms, their postures echoing Aegean fertility goddesses. But dig deeper and contradictions emerge. In one Ashkelon household shrine, archaeologists found such a figurine placed beside a Canaanite-style incense burner, as if two traditions had merged in quiet domestic ritual. Were these invaders clinging to old gods or weaving new ones from the threads of conquered lands? Burial sites offer darker hints. At Tel-Es-Safi, a Philistine cemetery revealed bodies interred with weapons and jewelry typical for warrior cultures, but also with something unexpected: pottery shaped like birds, their wings spread as if in flight. Similar bird motifs appear on Mycenaean frescoes, often linked to soul journeys. Yet in nearby Canaanite graves, such symbols are absent. This suggests the sea peoples carried beliefs across the waves, adapting them to new shores. One skeleton, a man buried with a horned helmet, held a clay boat model in his hands, its prow carved into a serpent's head. Was this a charm for safe passage to the afterlife, or the echo of a creation myth lost to time? The most provocative evidence comes from what they destroyed. At Ugarit, the ruins of a temple to Baal, the Canaanite storm god, show his altar shattered, his statues defaced. Yet in nearby Philistine settlements, Baal's name later resurfaces on inscribed amulets, stripped of his former dominance but still invoked. This wasn't mere erasure, it was a fraught negotiation of power. Perhaps the Sea Peoples didn't reject local gods outright but demoted them, making room for their own deities of wind and wave. Egypt's records add another layer. A relief at Karnak shows captive Sea Peoples chained beneath the feet of Amun-Ra, Egypt's supreme god. The accompanying text boasts that their foreign gods are weak before him. Yet the very need for such propaganda hints at fear that these invaders might have worshipped forces beyond Egypt's understanding. Some scholars point to the Sherdans' horned helmets, arguing they mimic sacred bull imagery from Sardinia and Anatolia, suggesting a cult of storm or warrior gods. Others note the Peliset's feathered headdresses, resembling those worn by Aegean priestesses in Minoan art. The silence grows louder when we ask, did they embrace chaos? A Mycenaean crater found in Cyprus paints a chilling scene. A ship crowded with warriors, their faces twisted in rage, while a figure with outstretched arms, a deity or demon, hovers above the waves. If this depicts a Sea People's raid, it implies they saw violence as divinely sanctioned. Yet in Philistine cities, later layers reveal peaceful offerings to a goddess dubbed Potnia. Her name borrowed from Mycenaean Greek, but her rituals blended with Canaanite customs. Perhaps their true belief was pragmatism. At Tel Kassil, a Philistine temple's layout mirrors Aegean designs, but its sacrifices sheep, not pigs, respect local taboos. This fluidity might explain why no single Sea People's religion emerges. Like their ships, their faith was built for crossing boundaries, taking on ballast from each new shore. Their gods, if they had names at all, may have been as hybrid as their culture deities of storm and harvest, war and hearth, evolving with every landfall. In the end, their religious legacy is written in absence. No grand temples endure, no hymns survive, only the stubborn persistence of small things, a bird-shaped amulet, a defaced idol, a child's grave with seashells placed carefully over its eyes, hints at the spiritual world these wanderers carried with them. And that, perhaps, is the most revealing truth. For people who lived between worlds, even the divine had to be portable. The silence of the Sea Peoples isn't just an absence of words, it's a wall standing between us and their world. Without decipherable writing, their voices are locked away, leaving historians to piece together their story through the biased accounts of their enemies and the silent testimony of artifacts. Imagine trying to reconstruct modern politics using only the graffiti of rival sports fans. You'd catch glimpses of conflict, but the deeper motivations, the alliances, the cultural nuances would remain maddeningly out of reach. This is the frustration scholars face when studying the Sea Peoples, a civilization that reshaped the Mediterranean, yet left no dictionary, no treatise, not even a shopping list to hint at their daily lives. The few linguistic clues we have are tantalizing but fragmented. Names like Sherdan and Peliset appear in Egyptian records, their sounds echoing distant languages. Some researchers hear whispers of Luwian, a tongue spoken in ancient Anatolia, in these syllables. The Luwians, after all, were seafarers and traders, their influence stretching across the Bronze Age world. Could the Sea Peoples have been Luwian-speaking raiders, their dialects lost when their ships sank? Others point to Etruscan, the mysterious language of pre-Roman Italy, noting similarities in suffixes and place names. But these are threads too thin to weave a full tapestry, like trying to identify a song by humming two notes. Even the Philistines, often linked to the Sea People's Peliset group, offer only linguistic crumbs. The Hebrew Bible preserves a handful of Philistine words, like Seren, meaning ruler, which some linguists connect to Greek tyrannos. But this could just as easily be a borrowed term, absorbed through trade or conquest. The problem is circular. Without more texts, we can't confirm language links, and without knowing their language, we can't interpret potential texts. It's a puzzle missing its key piece. The absence of writing raises deeper questions. Most contemporary cultures, Egyptians, Hittites, Mycenaeans, used writing for administration, religion, and poetry. The Sea People's lack of it suggests either a deliberate rejection of bureaucracy or a society so mobile that written records were impractical. Consider the difference between a farmer etching crop yields into clay and a seafaring warrior with no fixed address. One needs records, the other carries knowledge in songs and stories as ephemeral as sea foam. This linguistic void distorts our understanding in subtle ways. When Ramses III called the Sea Peoples foreigners from the ends of the earth, was he exaggerating their otherness, or did they truly speak in tongues unfamiliar to Egyptian ears? A single bilingual inscription, say, a treaty or a captured warrior's plea, could crack the code wide open. Until then, we're left with echoes, a conversation where only one side's words survive. And in that silence, the Sea Peoples remain just out of reach, their true story adrift between the lines of history. The Sea Peoples may have vanished from history, but they've stormed into our imaginations with a vengeance. From the pixelated battlefields of video games to the ink-stained pages of fantasy novels, these enigmatic raiders have become a blank canvas for storytellers, part historical mystery, part mythic boogeyman. Take the hit game Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where they appear as a secretive faction lurking in the Aegean, their ships lurking like ghosts in the mist. The game's designers didn't just borrow their name, they leaned into the ambiguity, crafting a shadowy network that feels authentically elusive. But contrast that with Total War, Pharaoh, which pits them as an apocalyptic horde, their armies surging across the map like a force of nature. Both portrayals tap into the same allure, a people so powerful, so unexplained that they can be molded into whatever the story needs. Books, too, can't resist their pull. Author S.M. Sterling's Island in the Sea of Time flips the script, imagining modern sailors flung back into the Bronze Age to confront the Sea Peoples firsthand. Sterling's take is refreshingly nuanced. They're not mindless barbarians, but complex societies with their own ambitions. Yet for every thoughtful depiction, there's a pulpy novel painting them as demon-worshipping marauders, their horns and feathers exaggerated into pure nightmare fuel. The difference often comes down to research. Responsible creators anchor their Sea Peoples in archaeological crumbs, those horned helmets from Egyptian reliefs, the sudden pottery shifts at Ashkelon, while sensationalists strip them down to a catchy logo, the Vikings of the Bronze Age minus the nuance. Even Hollywood can't resist, though its attempts are mixed. The 2014 film Exodus, Gods and Kings briefly named, drops them as a looming threat, reducing centuries of upheaval to a single ominous line. It's a wasted opportunity, but an instructive one. The Sea Peoples work best when their mystery is part of the story, not just set dressing. Compare that to the Troy TV series, which wove them into the Trojan War's backdrop as a destabilizing force, a clever nod to the real-world chaos that might have inspired Homer's epics. What's fascinating is how pop culture mirrors academia's debates. Just as scholars argue whether the Sea Peoples were invaders or refugees, storytellers toggle between villainy and tragedy. In the graphic novel Therma, they're depicted as climate refugees, their raids born of desperation, a poignant echo of modern crises. Meanwhile, tabletop games like Scythia cast them as elite mercenaries, their loyalty for sale to the highest bidder. These contradictions aren't flaws, they're proof of the Sea People's enduring intrigue. Without definitive answers, they become a Rorschach test for our own anxieties about collapse, migration, and the fragility of order. Yet some portrayals cross into outright fantasy. A recent streaming series mashed them up with Atlantis, spinning a tale of superhuman warriors wielding sky metal weapons. It's thrilling nonsense, but it highlights a tension. How far can you stretch history before it snaps? The best interpretations walk the line, like the Age of Bronze comic series, which grafts their raids onto the Trojan War saga with meticulous care, using shattered pottery shards and shipwreck artifacts as narrative glue. The Sea People's pop culture afterlife reveals something unexpected. Their silence in history isn't a void, but an invitation. Every generation fills it anew, projecting its fears and fascinations onto these ancient mariners. Whether they are cast as tragic migrants or existential threats, their legacy endures not in clay tablets, but in the stories we can't stop telling about them. And perhaps that's the ultimate irony: the people who left no records of their own have become immortal precisely because we keep writing their story for them. The secrets of the Sea Peoples may still lie beneath the waves and buried in unreadable inscriptions, but the tools to uncover them are advancing faster than ever. Imagine an AI so fluent in dead languages that it could scan a shattered clay tablet from Ugarit and reconstruct missing lines based on linguistic patterns across a dozen ancient tongues. Projects like this are already underway. Researchers at the University of Chicago trained neural networks to predict gaps in Akkadian cuneiform with startling accuracy. Now apply that to the handful of Sea Peoples names preserved in Egyptian texts. Could machine learning detect previously overlooked linguistic connections, linking Sherden to Sardinian dialects or Peliset to Philistine pottery markings? The key might be in the noise, the subtle grammatical quirks and phonetic shifts that human scholars might dismiss as insignificant, but which algorithms can cross-reference across thousands of artifacts in seconds. Beneath the Mediterranean surface, robotic explorers are rewriting the rules of archaeology. The wreck at Uluburan was just the beginning. New autonomous underwater vehicles, equipped with lasers that can see through layers of sediment, are mapping forgotten coastlines where Sea People's ships might have anchored. Off the coast of Sicily, a recent sonar sweep revealed a previously unknown Bronze Age harbor, its layout dotted with the same spiral motifs found on Philistine pottery. And then there's the Holy Grail, a shipwreck with intact cargo. Unlike the scattered finds at Cape Gelidonia, a preserved Sea People's vessel could reveal everything from their navigational tools to their cooking utensils, offering clues to their origins etched in everyday objects. Perhaps the most revolutionary tool lies in DNA analysis. When scientists extracted genetic material from 3,000-year-old Philistine bones at Ashkelon, they proved what pottery styles had only hinted at: European ancestry among the invaders. Now, new techniques can sequence DNA from even older samples, like dental plaque or the residue inside burial jars. Picture this: a team in Cyprus analyzing trace genetic material from a seemingly empty storage amphora, discovering it once held olive oil pressed by a community with Aegean and Levantine roots. Such findings could trace migration routes with precision, showing whether the Sea Peoples came in waves or as a single, coordinated push. Satellite technology adds another layer. Multispectral imaging, originally developed for agriculture, can detect buried ruins invisible to the naked eye. In southern Turkey, these cameras recently identified the outline of a massive late Bronze Age settlement now hidden beneath olive groves, its streets laid out in a grid pattern foreign to Hittite designs. Could this be a Sea People's stronghold? Ground-penetrating radar might soon tell us. Meanwhile, isotope analysis of teeth from Sardinian skeletons is revealing where individuals drank water as children, potentially proving whether the Sherden really came from the island or merely traded there. The future of Sea People's research isn't just about new tools, it's about connections. Databases like the Digital Archaeology Record now link finds from Greece to Egypt, allowing scholars to spot patterns across thousands of miles. A pottery shard dug up in Crete might share chemical signatures with clay from a Nile Delta fortress, suggesting trade or looting routes. Even social media plays a role. Amateur archaeologists in Lebanon recently crowdsourced translations of a previously ignored inscription by posting it to a Reddit forum, where a linguist recognized a rare Luwian phrase meaning storm from the sea. What's thrilling is how democratized this quest has become. You don't need a doctorate to contribute. Apps like Global Explorer let anyone analyze satellite images for undiscovered ruins, while open-source projects transcribe scanned cuneiform tablets online. The next breakthrough might come from a college student running a language decoding algorithm in their dorm, or a diver spotting an odd-shaped rock that turns out to be a Bronze Age anchor. The Sea People's greatest irony: in vanishing from history, they've given us an endless mystery, one that's pulling us forward into uncharted waters, armed with technologies they couldn't have dreamed of. And somewhere in that collision of ancient enigma and modern innovation, their story waits to be told. For a century, the Sea Peoples carved their legacy not in monuments or chronicles, but in the shattered remnants of empires. They were the storm that toppled palaces, the unseen hand that rewrote maps, and yet, irony of ironies, they left no words to tell their side of the story. Every trace we have comes filtered through the fear of their enemies. Egyptian pharaohs boasting of victories, Hittite scribes scrawling frantic pleas for help, Mycenaean tablets recording the abrupt silence of trade routes. Their history is a negative image defined by absences, the gaps in the archaeological record, the languages that vanished, the cities that never rose again. This silence speaks volumes about how history gets made. Winners don't just write the narrative, they decide whose voices are worth preserving. Imagine a world where the Hittites had survived to memorialize their downfall. Would we speak of the Sea Peoples as demons or as desperate migrants pushed by famine? Would their leaders have names, ambitions, even poetry? The tragedy isn't just that we've lost their perspective, it's that we'll never know what we've lost. The fragility of knowledge haunts every discovery. At Ugarit, a single kiln-fired tablet survived the inferno that consumed the city, preserving a final cry for help. But for every artifact that endures, countless others crumble to dust. The Sea People's story is a mosaic missing half its tiles, forcing us to fill the gaps with educated guesses and leaps of faith. Even their name feels like a placeholder, a label slapped on by others as if we're still waiting for them to introduce themselves. Archaeologist Eric Klein once said, "The Sea Peoples remind us that some stories are written in ashes, not ink, and perhaps that's their most enduring lesson." Civilizations rise and fall, but what survives isn't always truth, it's what the survivors choose to remember. The Mycenaeans' golden masks outlived their kingdom, while the Sea People's triumphs exist only in the ruins they left behind. It's a humbling thought that the mightiest forces can fade into shadow while a child's toy buried in rubble might endure for millennia. So what do you think? Were they conquerors or refugees, pirates or pioneers? The mystery is far from solved, and new discoveries, whether in DNA labs or underwater drones, keep rewriting the script. Dive deeper with books like 1177 B.C., the year civilization collapsed, or the Philistines and other Sea Peoples, and share your theories below. After all, history isn't just about answers. It's about the questions that keep us digging.